Hey everybody, it is the 1st of February, and this is the time of year where I get ready for spring bass fishing. In this episode, I'm going to go over 3 things that may help you get prepared for getting out there and catching those big bass as springtime starts to roll around. Stay tuned.
Shane Flint Outdoors, brought to you by Omnia Fishing. Experience the most personalized tackle shopping on earth. And MMA Fishing. Fight the bite. Also by Bent Rod Fishing. Get bent, stay bent.
What a big girl! Hey everybody, thanks for stopping back by the channel. Today we're going to talk about things to do to get prepared for spring bass fishing. You know, I get a little pumped around this time of year, 1st of February, because I catch most of my big bass from the middle of Feb to like the end of April here in Virginia. And so I like to get prepared, and I like to do a few things every year, kind of standardize getting ready for spring bass fishing. Now I do realize, depending on where you live at in the United States, spring bass fishing starts at different times. If you're up there in the north, you're still probably ice fishing. Down south in Florida, man, they were catching spawning bass down on Lake Okeechobee this past weekend in the Bassmaster Open. And oh, by the way, I want to say congratulations to Matt Adams, who placed 5th in that tournament. He is one of the owners of MMA Fishing, which produces phenomenal rods that I'm now utilizing. So again, congratulations, Matt, on a 5th place finish. That's awesome. But back to spring bass fishing here. Things that I like to do to get ready. It's kind of it's not rocket science. Just a few things that I just do every year that help me not only get ready for spring bass fishing, but just gets me ready for the fishing year, if you will. And I do fish year round. I kind of, January is probably the time of year I fish the least, the end of December into mid-January. I did get out, catch a few big bass last week in January, but for the most part, it's the coldest time of the year. So this time in February is when I start getting geared up for spring. Now, the 3 things I'm going to talk to you about today, again, not rocket science, but they're essential things to do to get ready for spring bass fishing. And the first thing that I like to do, I do bring all my equipment in, make sure matter of fact, got all my rods here sitting in the shop. I got my tackle tote, because I do have a tackle tote. I don't have a tackle box. It's a tote full of boxes, if you will. But I bring everything in, right? And I take all of the reels off my rods. And the first thing I do is I like to clean up my reels. So I get all my reels, I take them off, I take a damp cloth, I wipe them all down and make sure they're clean up the rods where the reels were seated, and then I like to lubricate my reels. And the 3 areas that I like to lubricate on the reels, I kind of standardize this, is I like to hit the worm gear, which is the gear right here where your line guide goes back and forth. That's the gear that makes your line guide go back and forth. That gear down here. So I hit that with a couple drops of lubricant there on top of the bar. And then right around the spool, where the spool touches the body, I'll drop a couple drops of oil right there, and then I'll just reel, right? And I'll let that, reel that lubricant in there. Sometimes I'll hit the thumb bar if I feel that they're sticky, but typically they're not. And all you have to use is, you can use any type of high speed. This is the Lew's bearing lubricant. The other one that I have is called Reel Butter. And it's just, good lubricant. And just clean up my reels and get them lubed up, And then I put them right back on the rods after I get done with them to get them ready for the second thing that's important. Probably the key thing to do, and that is I change out all the line on my reels. So I carry 13 rods and reels in my boat. I have 10 bait casters and 3 spin casting setups, and I change the line out on all of them. With the exception, I got a couple of new reels that I bought that I had to change out the line last month. But for the most part, I change out all my line. And what I like to do is I like to standardize the way I change out my line and what kinds of line I use on my rods. And I do that by bait application. And I'll explain that just a bit. But I use the first thing I do to standardize is I use one brand of line, and that's Sunline. I use Sunline for all of my rods and reels. I do not use braid for the most part. I'll talk about that in just a minute. There's times that I do use it, but for my setups on a day-to-day basis, all of my rods and reels have Sunline on them. And I either use Sunline FC Sniper, FC Assassin, or I use Shooter. And there are different grades of fluorocarbon, all really good fluorocarbon. I'll explain what pound test line I use with each application here. So one of my key rods and reel setups that I utilize the most during the spring is, as you guys probably know this if you've watched my channels, I love the spinnerbait. So for a spinnerbait rod, for a chatterbait rod, or any big baits, if you will, that I'm gonna fish on a medium heavy or heavy rod, I go with FC Sniper and 18-pound test line. So I use an FC Sniper and I use it, and this is an 18-pound. I don't have the label in front of it, but 18-pound test line is what I put on my medium heavy and heavy rods that have spinnerbait, chatterbait, or a big swim bait. I need a heavy type rod. I use a heavy line with a heavier bait application like that, and that's an 18-pound test line. And that's 3 or 4 rods right there of my out of my casting rods that I utilize. So standardize that, 18-pound test line, FC Sniper. Now for the next 3 or 4 rods that I have on my bait casting side, that's typically my jerk bait, and that's my crankbait rod, my deep crankbait rod. And then I always have like a short bill for a square bill crankbait, a shallow crankbait rod, or my lipless crankbait. Those are different rods. Those are more of a medium flex rod. So they have a lot of action in those rods because they got treble hooks. You want those treble hooks to stay in the fish. So you need a little more action in your rods. And I use on those rods, actually only 12-pound test line. And I use the 12-pound Sunline Assassin on those rods. And 12 pounds plenty. That's plenty enough pound strength, and you want the smaller diameter, especially on your deep diving crankbaits, to get the best performance and depth out of your crankbaits as well. Some people even go as light as 10 or 8 to 10 pound test. 12 is about right for me on my fluorocarbon, and I use, like I said, Sunline FC Assassin on those rods. So those 3 or 4 rods, 12-pound test line. And then for my jig rod and my Texas rig worm with that single, like if I have a Texas rig worm or a Texas rig creature bait or anything like that, that's got a medium heavy action rod, but it's got that single big hook that I'm gonna really rear back and set the hook. I like to have a little bit tougher line. So what I go with that is I put on a 14-pound FC Sniper Sunline. So those have a 14-pound test line on those rods and reels. And one of the things that I do to help remind, that, like I said, it's kind of standardized, but what I do is I label all my rods, and I have these little labels here, like this is 12-pound test line I'm going to put on those rods, and I label every rod, and I can show you here because I'm just about ready to spool this rod and reel up. This is my spinnerbait rod, and it's going to have 18-pound Sniper on it, and it's going to be, I put January 24, it's actually February 24, I'll scratch that out, but I put that sticker on the rod, and I put it between the handle and the butt of the rod, because right here, it won't get scratched off. If you put it up here on your rod, a lot of times they get wore off, scratched off, because it gets exposed. Right there, I don't know about you, but I don't typically put my hand right here. It's either here or on the bottom. So that's a spot I like to put that sticker where it doesn't wear out through the year. And I just put the pound test line and the date that I put it on there, the month and year that I put it on there, just to help me remind me what I have on there. Now, I typically only change out my line once a year. And with the Sunline, I've not had an issue with breakage or it's, wore out. Now, if I backlashed a whole bunch or something like that, or I had issues, yep, I'd change it out. But typically I don't have any issues. I got all my reels set up to where they're pretty smooth. I try not to backlash. We all backlash occasionally, but don't do a lot of backlashing. Now, talking about my spinning rods. For my spinning rods, I typically use 12-pound shooter. Sunline 12-pound shooter. My Kitech, this little 3/16 Kitech with this 3/0 hook. This guy right here, I catch a lot of fish on. 12-pound shooter. Medium action rod, and then I have a medium heavy action rod as well in my spinning, and it gets 12-pound shooter as well. The only exception is my drop shot rod has 10-pound. And I'm probably going to change that drop shot rod to 12-pound this year, maybe not. But 10-pound on my drop shot rod, I think I can get away at 12. There's not that big a difference between 12 and 10 diameter wise. So I think I'll probably go to 12 on all my spinning this year. So that's what I do on my spinning rods is 12-pound or 10-pound, and again label that, and I use shooter on all my spinning rods. Now, I did say I use braid. Occasionally I use braid, and primarily I use braid for my topwater rods. And what I do is I set aside a couple reels and I just put braid on them. Now I changed out my braid. Typically I use Suffolks. That's what I like. 40-pound test line is what I typically put on here. And I changed and tried some other braid last year and I didn't like it. I'm going back to Suffolks. So I keep 2 reels set aside with just braid. When topwater time comes, and I do fish the topwater a little bit during the spawn, but typically right after the spawn in the summer, I go to braid and I just take and change the reels out with braid. Now, if I need to go down to Florida, or if I'm in a big heavy cover area that I need to go to braid, I just have those reels set aside. But I don't typically do the braid to mono. I don't do an FG knot. I just do either straight braid or straight mono, depending on what I need. Now, one other trick that I'd like to use with my fluorocarbon, because fluorocarbon is expensive. It's not cheap, right? Braid's not cheap neither. But I don't fill my spools up. I only put about 75 to 85 yards of line on my spools. Now, this is a Daiwa Tatula CT100, and I either have these or two T103s, Tatula reels, all Daiwa Tatulas, but they typically have this size spool. And I only put about half on here, about 85 yards max. You don't use more than 85 yards. So with like a 225 yard spool, I can get 3 reels spooled up with line. And if you had to change it out, you had to change it out. But for the most part, 85 yards is plenty. You're gonna, you might break off a few times. If you break off too hard, right, you're gonna have to change it out. But you typically break off in the first few feet of your lure or at the knot, right? So 85 yards is typically plenty, and it's usually about half of a spool on my reel on these Daiwa Tatulas. And it's good line management because you don't have to worry about too much on the spool. And even if you do get a backlash, there's less line on there. It's easier to get out. It's just, for me, not only does it save a little bit of money on line by putting, not spooling up a whole reel with fluorocarbon, but it's just more manageable. And I do that same on the spinning rods. My spinning rods only put the same amount, about 75, 80 yards on my spinning reels. So it helps me keep things a little bit more manageable there on the spools themselves, and cost a little less. You don't need to spool it up with 150 yards of line. Just because the reel can handle it doesn't mean you need to put it all on there. Now, back in the day when I did mono, years and years ago, yep, I spooled it all the way up and I'd strip off 30 or 40 yards halfway through the season or a couple months in. But you get a lot of breaks in mono back then. Quality of your fishing line today is much better than it was 15, 20 years ago. So that's why I don't change out the line as much, and that's why I use smaller amounts on the spools themselves. So the last thing that I like to do is I like to go through my tackle. And I don't like to go through my tackle just to look at it. I like to make sure that I have the right things in my tackle box. And when I say the right things, I don't have a tackle box. I have a tackle tote, and there's a picture of it there, and you can see it's pretty big, and I have lots of different smaller tackle boxes inside that. But I want to make sure I have the lures that I know that I'm going to utilize from that 15 February to the end of April, during that spring time frame. Like, I'm going to make sure I have this pile of spinnerbaits right here. I'm going to make sure all those spinnerbaits are in that box. By the way, this is the last episode I was out catching some fish on Lake Mooney and caught some nice ones. And I was fishing with a white spinnerbait. And this is the actual one. This is a Covert Series Booyah. And I told you it was a 1 ounce spinnerbait. It was actually a 3/4 ounce spinnerbait. I had a guy go, I can't find a 1 ounce. I can find a 3/4 ounce. It was a 3/4 ounce. My bad. You can get these at Omnia Fishing. Use that discount code SFO24 at checkout to save 15%. But back to getting everything in a box and making sure I'm comfortable knowing that I have the lures that I'm going to utilize, like my jerk baits, like my chatterbaits, like my spinner baits, the right soft plastics, the jigs, everything that I know that I'm going to utilize in the spring, I'm going to make sure is in that box and ready to go when I set that tote back into my boat and get out there fishing. Gives me a good state of mind. Now, we all have our little techniques to going through our tackle and stuff, but at the end of the day, going through what I know is in my box, I don't have to second guess, did I remember putting this in the boat or not? One time going through it, I'm good to go, and it helps me both mentally prepare, knowing that I got the right stuff in there, but physically having the right things in the box. So, well, hey folks, that's the 3 things that I like to do before I get out there for spring bass fishing. I like to clean up those reels, lubricate them, get the new line on there, label those rods with the line on them, and then go through my tackle and make sure I got the right tackle in the right box, in my box to go in the boat. Hopefully some of the things I talked about you can utilize as well. Thanks everybody for stopping by. And I hope, whenever springtime fishing comes, you can utilize some of these techniques as well as catch some big bass. And we'll be talking at you real soon. By the way, the Shane Flint Outdoor tournaments are spinning up. The first one starts on the 11th of March, and that's the Southern Big Bass Tournament. As always, all you have to do to register for those tournaments is email me at shaneflintoutdoors@yahoo.com and we'll get you registered. So, hey again, thanks everybody for stopping by, and until next time, tight lines and good luck fishing.